So you may have clicked on this video because you Googled, I can't burp, and are hoping for a treatment or a solution after years of discomfort. You might be here because you saw my TikTok, or you might be here because you read the title and saw the thumbnail and were like, what is going on? Either way, I'm happy to have you. Today we're going to talk about how I got a medical diagnosis and treatment for my inability to burp. Something that I was dealing with for 20 plus years. Spoiler alert, the treatment worked, and I've been able to burp for over 3 years now. We're gonna go through all the details, including how I got diagnosed, how to find a doctor, whether or not insurance covered it, and more, including all of the embarrassing questions that you might be too afraid to ask. I'm also gonna separate this video into chapters in case you wanna skip around. But before we get into all that, my name is Brittany, also known as Brit Curls on the internet. Here we usually talk about curly hair things, tips and tricks, but today we're doing it a little different. So I hope you stick around, and if you want to know how I do my hair, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. So let's level set here. What does it mean when you can't burp, and what is it even called? So this issue is called Retrograde Cricopharyngeus Dysfunction, or R-CPD for short, and this was named by Dr. Robert Bastian in his paper Inability to Belch and Associated Symptoms Due to Retrograde Cricopharyngeus Dysfunction. We will talk more about Dr. Bastian later. Now, what's happening here is that your cricopharyngeus muscle, which is right about here, stays tightly closed when things need to come up. So it works normally when you're swallowing, going down, but it doesn't work in retrograde or in reverse when food or air needs to come up. So oftentimes people who have R-CPD cannot vomit or burp. Now, people with R-CPD, also known as no burpers, typically present a variety of other symptoms along with the inability to belch. This includes gurgling noises, upper abdominal pain, bloating, and excessive flatulence. Super fun. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of background into why I sought treatment, and if you have R-CPD or think you do, you might find your story a little bit similar to mine. So taking it back to 1994. When I was born, I had no issue burping whatsoever. My mom burped me like she did all of her other children, no problem. However, my little brother had something called an immature gag reflex where he just threw up constantly. Unsure if this is related to my issue exactly, but what happened to me is that I developed a fear of vomiting just because I saw my little brother throw up all the time, constantly. I also had a pretty bad stomach bug when I was younger, and I just remember like vomiting and just hysterically crying because I was afraid of throwing up and my worst fear was happening. So I think sometime around then is when I lost this reflex. Now, I should mention that I didn't really notice that I couldn't burp growing up. Like, I knew that I didn't burp, but I didn't know that I couldn't do it. But looking back, there are clear signs that it was affecting me. So I remember oftentimes I would eat dinner and then my stomach would just be so cramped and I would just lay in bed to make it feel better. That was likely because I was bloated and full of air, and if I had just been able to burp even just once, I probably would have felt better. But I didn't connect the two. Now, what I did start to notice later in life as I entered into high school is gurgling noises. Everyone who has R-CPD has a different name for these. Some call them dinosaur noises, strangled whale, ghost noises, an exorcism, burpees, devil noises, things like that. And so what's happening here is that because this muscle right here is so tightly closed, air makes a noise when it seeps out. Think of it like when you hold the end of a balloon, you'll get these really weird sounding noises as the air passes through the muscle. Gonna play some examples of those here. So this is what I would typically sound like after dinner. And I remember that in 8th grade, I got my first cell phone, I recorded the noises, and I brought it to my doctor and was like, hey, I get pretty uncomfortable after dinner, my throat is making these weird noises, what do you think that is? And he basically was like, I don't know, doesn't really sound like an issue.
Cool.
So because the doctor said it wasn't an issue, I just thought it wasn't an issue. So I continued on with my life, went to college, and in college I started drinking. I drank a ton of beer, which I don't know why because I do not like beer, but it was like the only thing available sometimes. And beer is often associated with belching. It's bubbly, it's creating air in your stomach, and when there's air in your stomach, it needs to exit somehow. And I just remember at the end of like college parties feeling so uncomfortable, bloated, and the only thing that really helped was going to sleep. But while in college, I did meet other people who had this issue. And like in my sorority alone, there was like 10 girls who had it or were related to someone who had it, which I don't know what the common denominator was there, but that was kind of a lot of people. Some of these girls told me that the only way that they were able to find relief was by making themselves gag. Now, they weren't gagging to throw up food or to throw up like anything that they had just drank. They would gag, nothing would come up, but it would allow the throat to open for a second and air to come out, and they would find relief. Now, unfortunately, I'm unable to make myself gag, so that never worked for me, but that was kind of the first time that I was like, oh, other people have this besides me. But let me tell you, in college, this was like a super awkward issue to have. Like, imagine being in a silent college class where no one is participating, and then this sound. Or imagine that you are like hooking up with a guy that you're interested in, and you lean in for a kiss, and then this noise. And then the guy pulls back and he's like, oh my God, are you about to throw up on me? And then you have to explain, well, I have this thing. Ruins the moment. But after college, my issue got worse and worse. I noticed that I was having gurgling for longer periods of time, like 5 to 7 hours. I was getting super duper bloated to the point where sometimes I just felt like I couldn't really stand up straight. And wearing things like high-waisted pants or anything that was tight on my stomach area was just unbearable and a recipe for disaster. There was one specific situation that I remember where I went out with friends and I had one beer. And I started to get so uncomfortably full and bloated with air that I stopped drinking completely. And yet I still threw up at the end of the night. Not because I was drunk, but because my body was so stuffed with air from here to here that it had no other option. And truly, like, this was like violent vomiting. Like, I would feel super nauseous before, just, like if you're normally going to throw up, and all that would come out is air. That's it. And I would feel amazing afterwards, but the entire rest of my night had been ruined, essentially. Now, I should note that I had lost my fear of vomiting at this point because I had now associated vomiting with relief. But this was starting to happen more often to the point where I was like, okay, I need to figure out like what the heck is wrong with me and find treatment for this because this is ridiculous. So I turned to the internet. And in March of 2019, I stumbled upon a subreddit called No Burp. I think this had like 12 to 14,000 members at the time that I found it, but I was shocked because this was a group of thousands of people who had the exact same issue as me. And what's more is that many of the people in the subreddit were discussing a treatment that had gotten rid of the issue permanently. Now, earlier I mentioned Dr. Robert Bastian. He's the one who pioneered the naming and treatment of this issue. In the subreddit, there was his study posted, which once again is called Inability to Belch due to Retrograde Cricopharyngeus Dysfunction and associated symptoms or something like that. But reading that study was so validating because I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm reading about myself. So what did I find in the subreddit? How do you treat R-CPD? Let's go through the 3 options. The number one thing that people were talking about was Botox. Now, I already love me some Botox. I have it in my forehead right now, but Botox has a variety of medical uses. You may have heard it used for vaginismus or migraines. It can also be used for R-CPD. Essentially, Botox is injected into the cricopharyngeus muscle, which relaxes it and allows air to pass through. And as the Botox wears off, you maintain that mind-muscle connection. You learn that it's okay for air to pass through here. And then you retain this ability to burp without the Botox, and many people do not need repeat injections. So the second treatment is a bit newer, and I hadn't read about this in the subreddit at the time that I was doing this research, but Dr. Bastian had also pioneered a different kind of treatment where he does a partial myotomy and cuts the muscle. So this is an irreversible treatment that's meant for people that the Botox fails. There are a small percentage of people who get the Botox multiple times. It doesn't work for them. and they're still, wanting to get something done. This seems to be kind of a last resort situation, and I'm also going to link to this study in the description box below that goes through that process. And lastly, there are non-surgical options, which many people were also discussing in the subreddit for a variety of reasons, whether that be you can't afford the treatment, you don't want to travel, there's no one near you who does it, or you just don't want to get surgery. So some of these treatment options would be as basic as like literally chugging a liter of soda and seeing what happens. Some people had positive results here, some people definitely not. Other people were able to do exercises. There is one called the Shakir exercise, I believe that it's called, where people were essentially able to like work the muscle. I'm going to link both of these below, the soda, someone's personal experience doing that, as well as video links to the Shakir exercise, so you can see if either of these are of interest to you. Personally, I had tried some of these non-surgical at-home options and didn't have any luck. So if you want to get Botox, what kind of doctor even does this treatment, and how do you even find someone who will do it for you? So the Botox treatment is typically done by an ENT or ear, nose, and throat doctor, likely someone who specializes in voice or swallowing disorders. And I believe that the Botox injection is a similar treatment to that for dysphagia, which is a swallowing disorder. So this is something that like a typical ENT who deals with swallowing issues should be able to do. Now, I personally believe that this often goes undiagnosed because it presents as a GI issue and not an ENT issue. Now, granted that all of this, this research by Dr. Bastian is really, really new within like the last 5 years. But I feel like if you have, bloating, inability to belch, you might first go to your GI doctor without realizing, hey, this is something that an ENT might be better suited to fix. Now, in this point in my journey, I was super desperate to get all of this done, but Dr. Bastian was located in Chicago and I was located in New York. So I figured I would start here. I feel like there are some of the best doctors in the world in New York City, and I printed out his original study and brought it to some ENTs. Unfortunately, I had trouble finding a doctor who believed me or took me seriously. There was one doctor who specifically just looked at me and was like, well, just change your diet. Stop drinking soda. Thinking that the way I was eating was making me feel like I had to burp and making me gassy. Now, mind you, most people who have R-CPD do not drink soda because it makes us so uncomfortable. And I knew that this guy just truly didn't believe me, didn't care. Now, I was so desperate that after seeing a couple doctors who didn't believe me, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna fly to Chicago and see the man himself, Dr. Robert Bastian, the one who pioneered this whole treatment. Now, these days, that's not necessary. There are more and more doctors who are doing this treatment every day. So what I will do is I will link a doctor list in the description box below. Check to see if there's someone in your area or just a more convenient person for you to travel to. There are even doctors who are international on that list. But I should stress that you can find a doctor in your area who will do this for you. It's just about finding someone who believes you. So please, please, please advocate for yourself. If you see someone who isn't taking you seriously, it might be time to see a different doctor. Now, how is R-CPD diagnosed? What's the process there? So typically it's diagnosed symptomatically. If you are hearing my experience and being like, wow, that sounds exactly like me, I get gurgles, I can't burp, I get bloated, etc., you probably have it. There is no test to see whether or not you have R-CPD. The only thing that doctors will do are tests to make sure that nothing else is wrong. So when I flew out to see Dr. Bastian, he stuck a camera down my nose and watched me swallow to make sure that was normal. I also had to eat like some blue applesauce, and then he was able to do some imaging and watch me swallow that to make sure everything was normal. They just don't want to give you Botox if food going down this way is not working correctly. So they just want to rule everything else out. And once they see that everything else is normal, likely you have R-CPD. I do always get asked, by the way, about the camera down the nose because I know that makes some people super nervous. For me, it was not that bad. It was like a little bit of discomfort. They numb your nose to do it. And it's like a super duper quick thing. So do not be worried about that. So how much does Botox cost? Now, mind you, I went like 3 years ago, so these costs could have changed, but I was given 2 different options. One was cheaper and one was more expensive. So the cheaper option was a $1,500 in-office visit in which the Botox is injected from the outside of the throat. Now, Dr. Bastian did not recommend doing this to me because he really just doesn't have visibility into where he's injecting. So he had felt that there was a higher percent chance that the treatment wouldn't work if I went with that option. The second option was the more expensive option. This was $2,700, where I would go to a surgical center, be put under general anesthesia, and they would go through my throat to inject me. Now, I was lucky enough to be on my dad's union insurance at the time, and I had already hit my deductible before getting all of this done. So it was covered 100%. I cannot speak for everyone. I do not know whether or not other insurances will cover this, but all I had to pay was a $200 copay for the surgical center, and that was it. Dr. Bastian does make you like call your insurance and ask for like CPT codes and what certain things would cost. So you probably can figure out like if your insurance would cover this beforehand. But I felt so lucky that it cost me nothing. But the other thing you just have to factor in, for me at least, is the cost of the flights, hotel, lodging while I was in the Chicago area, because I flew from New York to get this done. A little bit of medical tourism, I guess. So let's get into what my experience was like with Dr. Bastian and the Botox overall. So first off, I cannot stress enough how nice it is to talk to a doctor who believes you. Oh my goodness. Like, to hear him just completely validate my experience and like nod along when I was talking was just so nice. And everyone at the office was like amazing. So before the procedure, I had to stop eating or drinking at midnight the night before, like typical general anesthesia instructions. I was given a Zantac prior to the procedure just to make sure any like stomach acid didn't come up while they were doing it. The anesthesia that I was given was administered via IV, fell asleep quite quickly, and woke up in the recovery room. Apparently the whole thing took about like 30 minutes. It's super duper quick. And I woke up, just felt a little groggy. My throat felt a little bit sore, but not too bad. And I left the surgical center and went like straight to a cafe for lunch. Had like pretty soft foods just to play it safe. So I had like eggs and oatmeal, but had no trouble like eating or swallowing. And then that night I took a plane home, which honestly, like I was still pretty groggy from the anesthesia. So probably didn't need to like do it that quickly. But as I was sitting on the plane, I had a teeny tiny little baby burp, and I wasn't sitting next to my mom who had accompanied me, sitting next to some random woman, but I gasped. And she probably was like, what is going on with this girl? The next day, I ended up going to work, and my voice definitely sounded a little bit strained, like kind of like as if I had just finished crying. For the first couple days, I had really random like micro burps, but I didn't feel like I had any control over them or like they were super satisfying. And I did also start to experience what is called slow swallow. So this is a typical symptom after getting the Botox injection done, and it's basically like you'll take a bite of food, swallow it, and it'll just hang out right here, which sounds super alarming, but Dr. Bastian warned me about this, and he had told me that basically the food has already passed my airway at this point, so there's really no chance of me choking on it. All I'd have to do is, as I take a bite, take a sip of water, and that would help the food down. So that was really not too much of an issue, and that slow swallow lasted about 2 weeks for me. Now, as the days went on, probably like days 5 to 9, I would gurgle, and at the end, it would turn into a burp. And as that continued to happen, the gurgles became less frequent and the burps became more frequent. But what started to be really funny is that as the Botox sets in, this muscle just basically becomes like an open flap. So I was having these like absolutely crazy burps. Like I remember I started laughing at one point and I was burping as I was laughing for literally like 15 seconds. Like it was so, and that, I mean, obviously made me laugh more, but it was so funny. But at this point I started to burp all the time, like burping as I was talking, burping as I stood up, sat down, like literally I remember walking to work and counting 26 burps just from the 10 minutes it took me to walk from Port Authority to 46th Street. Like that's a lot. So at the time I was working in sales and I was client facing, and I took about like maybe 2 weeks off from going to clients, just because my manager was like, I don't want you to be like speaking to a client and then burping in their face, because truly, like, I could not control it. It would come out as I was talking. When I hit the month mark, I started to burp less often, but these were burps that I could control. I would say they were a little bit bigger. And I also learned that I could like keep a burp in if I needed to, like burp with my mouth closed or in a way that wasn't rude and me just like, blah. I also forgot to mention that I was practicing burping around this time. So Dr. Bastian had me buy like a 24 pack of Perrier. So after dinner, I would like drink one and then practice burping. And so my gurgles basically stopped. Like, I'll get one every so often, but it'll usually be because I'm like laying in a weird position, or it's just like not enough air to be a burp, but it's never something that is like bothering me. I know that that means that a burp is usually on the way. And I gotta tell you, burping is so beyond satisfying. Like, it's unbelievable. I also didn't know that when you burp, you could like taste food coming up. That was new to me, but it is like so amazing. So after getting this all done, I do not get bloated. I do not feel uncomfortable. At the end of the day, I don't feel like my stomach is hanging out. Like, I genuinely just feel normal. The only negative thing from being able to burp is that every so often I'll get an acid burp where I'll think that air is coming up and it's actually stomach acid. That happens like once every 6 months. Like, it literally does not happen often, but every time it happens, I'm like, oh, like, that is gross. Like I mentioned, I lost my fear of throwing up, but I have had a few emetophobes reach out to me and say like, have you thrown up since getting, the Botox done? I haven't. But if I need to, I know that that's something that my body has the ability to do now. Now, why treat R-CPD? Take it from me, it can lead to other stomach issues. And this is why I'm like so passionate about telling people about this. Not only can you find major relief, like get your normal day-to-day life back, but you could also prevent other issues from happening. So around the time that I decided to seek treatment, I was also diagnosed with chronic gastritis. So this is an inflammation of the stomach lining. My doctors thought that it was partially from stress, but also partially because I had like a foreign body in my stomach that I couldn't get rid of. Anytime that there is air there, it's not meant to be hanging around in your stomach or in your GI tract. Your body has mechanisms to get rid of it, and one of mine was not working. So we think that that is potentially a reason that I developed gastritis. I also developed acid reflux, which Dr. Bastian hypothesized was because there was air pressing on my lower esophageal sphincter, that there was like a bit of nerve damage there from all of that air pressing on it for so long. You don't want this issue to turn into something else. Now, I should note here that the Botox does not work for everyone. It worked so well for me, but many people do have to get it again, or upon repeat treatment, it does not work. So that's just something, camera died, but that's just something to think about before you go in and get something like this done or spend the money on it. So lastly, I want to talk through some resources if you're looking for more info. So first and foremost, I've mentioned it a bunch of times throughout this video, but I highly, highly recommend going to read the study by Dr. Bastian just to learn more about what this issue is. Next, I definitely recommend going on reddit.com/r/noburp and checking out the no burp community, reading about different people's experiences. If you want to read through my full experience getting the Botox done, you can search for Bastian Botox number 154. I was only patient number 154 to get this done by Dr. Bastian. Obviously, there are many, many more people all over the world now, but it felt kind of cool to be one of those early members. There is a Facebook group that I will list down below. And then also, if you're interested, I was featured in an episode of Reply All talking about my experience, and Dr. Bastian is also interviewed there. And once again, make sure to check out the doctor list to see if there are doctors in your area who do this treatment. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope this was informative and helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer everything in the comments down below. But I wish you all well, and I hope that if you do decide to seek treatment, that it goes well. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, night, whatever time it is. And if you liked my content or style of videos and you like my hair and want to know how I did it, once again, stick around. I will hopefully talk to you guys soon. Bye, guys. So I turned to the internet. There we go. Another one. Another one. See, talking makes you burp.